Welcome. That's right. It's time for another build video, people. This one for Elden Ring. As you can see, my herb tree probably looks a little bit different than yours at the moment. That's because I've beaten the game, and I've done a lot of testing to bring you the ultimate, overpowered Wretchlord build. This is a build for level 150, and it's actually not one of the gimmicky builds where you use like one ability or two abilities to get overpowered. This is more of a build to let you do all sorts of stuff, tackle any encounter the way that you want, and just be able to do powerful stuff all around. You've got great defenses, great offenses. It's not a one-shot build or any of the meme builds out there. It's just a really fun way to play the game and to be effective. People will definitely not be expecting this. You're basically able to reduce incoming damage by about 50%. You're able to do bleeds with seppuku. You're able to use all of the spells pretty much except for I think 3 or 4, both incantations and sorceries, and you can do it all at level 50, which seems to be the consensus on the sort of PvP soul level. So I've designed it around that basis. Without further ado, let me get into the build. So basically what I'm doing is I've got the Golden Order Seal to cast my incantations, and I'm using Prince of Death's Staff to cast my spells. And why is that? So when I initially looked at doing this build, I wanted to do a dark magic build. So I wanted to be able to use all of dark spells and the incantations, and be able to cast both of them very effectively, right? So the actual God Seal, Godslayer's Seal is actually better for the dark incantations, but you can just equip that here if you want to, here if you want to, get the boost to the Godslayer incantations, but the scaling on the Order Seal is actually better. So we've gone with a intelligence faith spread, so 60 in each of those. You can see over here, on the right over here, so intelligence is 60, faith is 60, vigor is 23. That's all I need because I can do a bunch of damage reduction, which I'll get into in a little bit. Mind is 26. That lets me cast, in my opinion, the best summons in the game right now, which is Black Knife Tiche. And then you've got, 20 endurance seems to be plenty. That lets me equip, along with Greatjar's Arsenal, I can equip the Crucible Helm and all of this stuff and still be able to meet it. Right, so 20 endurance is all you need. I might be actually able to go lower, but yeah, that's all I really need. Let's go back to equipment. And then for strength and dexterity, I've only gone 12 in each, and basically that lets me use a base set of weapons that's pretty solid. It's not the best weapons in the game by any means, although you can use the Sword of Night and Flame because of your high intelligence and faith. It's not the best weapon in the game, the best weapons in the game, but they're pretty good weapons. I'll go through those. But that's all you need in those two stats, 12 in each. And so you're not wasting weapons. And then intelligence and faith, 60 each, as I said. Arcane 16. Arcane 16 gives you access to the dragon incantations, which are really powerful. So I'll show you. And this basically lets you use almost every incantation and every spell. So I'll show you that right here. And I'll go into why I chose these spells specifically for my loadout. But you can see, there's the only spells that I can't really use right now are Great Oracular Bubble, which is honestly a very good spell. Ronnie's Dark Movement, prowess for you. So those are both really good, or all three of those are really good spells. I can't use those, unfortunately. I need to get a bit more int, 10 more points of int there, and 2 more points of arcane. I don't like the speed of Oracular Bubble, and I don't like the speed of these two in terms of how long it takes to hit the enemy. This Ronnie's Darkening is really powerful. It'll cause you to do 30% more damage to the enemy after they get hit with this, with any subsequent spell that you hit them with after that. So eventually you do want to get this spell as you go above 150, but in order to get an effective build at 150, you can't get this. You want to, for the scaling on your staff and on your seal, you want to have int and faith at the same level to maximize your damage. And then the other spell that you can't really use is Blood Boon, so I'd need a couple more points and just 1 more point of arcane to be able to use that. It's not a great spell anyway, so I mean it's kind of interesting and fun to play around with. That's fantastic. And the same thing with Grails. So every other spell in the game you can use, and you can swap it out based on the circumstances, of what you want to do. But in my opinion, this is the best all-around loadout. I spent, last week I spent about, 10 hours testing out spells, figuring out what resistances certain enemies had, so I could make sure I had the accurate information in terms of damage to FP cost and all of that. And this is what I came up with. I'll show you just how powerful this loadout is a little bit. But Abdullah's Moonblade, if somebody gets into melee range with you, this will destroy them, right? And it's a fast cast, and it also does cold blow. Terra Magica, I put this in the second slot. So I put this in the first slot so I can just hold up on my direction pad, or on my cross pad, and then that'll instantly switch back. I'll show you what I'm talking about here. So right now I am on Ancient Death Ring. If I just hold up, I swap immediately to Abdullah's Moonblade. So this is so that I can just do that really quick. I can dodge roll, do that, and then pop it if somebody is on me. So that's why I put that in that first slot. And then the second slot is Terra Magica. Right? And Terra Magica lasts for a good long time, but you have to stand in the seal that it places on the ground. But that increases your spell damage by, I think it's about 30%. And then, then I would cast and do these spells otherwise. Now, Stars of Ruin, after the latest patch, 1.03, is fantastic, right? It's really fast tracking. The tracking is amazing, and it does all kinds of damage. So I actually use this instead of Comet Azor. Now, Comet Azor, everybody loves this. I loved it, and yeah, sure, it's a really good spell. That can do a ton of damage, particularly if you're using the right flask, so you can eliminate FP cost. But what I've noticed is that all you have to, you line it up on bosses, and when they don't move, you destroy them. But if they do move just a little bit, then you waste the opportunity, and you might end up dying, right? So it's kind of a gimmicky, difficult spell to use. But if you look at Stars of Ruin, you actually end up doing more damage per FP, and this tracks like unbelievably well. And you can also charge it, right? And that'll be important here in a little bit because all of these spells that I have up here, pretty much, you can charge them. I'm using the talisman that affects charge spells, but let me get through the rest of the spells. The next one that I use is a death spell. And this is Ancient Death Rancor. Now, Ancient Death Rancor is one of the death abilities, which means that the staff that I'm using is going to actually boost the damage on this, right? Plus the icon that I'm using, because you can charge it, will also increase the damage. So I'll get into that. Now, this one also has amazing tracking. It's a little bit slow, but it does a bunch of damage, and it also does poise damage. So in my opinion, and the damage to FP is pretty good. So in my opinion, this is actually a superior spell to use versus Rock Sling. So I love Rock Sling. It does a lot of stagger damage, you know, and it has incredible range, like really, really good range. But you can pump out a bunch of these, and they will pummel the enemy and stagger them, and it's actually pretty impressive. So I'll show you that in a little bit. Ambush Shard is an interesting one, right? Like, nobody expects the Ambush Shard. It's like the Spanish Inquisition. You can cast this thing when somebody is facing you, and it hits them from behind. Right? This is a really cool spell. So you just do away from that. There you go. So you see that comes from the other direction and swings towards you. So if the enemy has a shield or something like that, then you know you're basically gonna be able to hit them without them being able to get any defense from the shield because it hits them in the back. Right? So it doesn't matter what the enemy is. And because you can charge this one too, you get the extra damage boost from the seal that I showed you, the talisman, and that actually gives this a really good damage to FP ratio. It's also a fast cast, right? So I really like that spell. It's kind of a surprise not a lot of people are using it, but the damage to FP is good. You can get around shields, so this is a handy one to have on your board. Then we get to Glintstone Comet Shard. Again, it's sort of like Glintstone Pebble, right, which is the go-to for everybody. This is great damage to FP. This one, you know, it's slightly worse damage to FP, but if you can one-shot an enemy with one spell rather than having to cast 3 pebbles, then you're better off on an FP damage to FP ratio. And this one does a lot more damage, and once again, you can charge it. So you can see what I'm doing here, right? Same thing with Night Maiden's Mist. Chargeable spell. I don't think the charge actually does more damage on this one, but the charge will increase the area of effect for Night Maiden's Mist. This one is amazing. Shoot, I didn't want to do that. This one is amazing because you can drop it down, and enemies will kind of run into it and ignore the damage that they're taking from it, and just it will decimate people. This is one of the highest damage to FP spells in the game, as long as people stay in it. And I've cast it during PvP too, and people just seem not to realize what's happening, and they just kind of stand in the cloud, and it destroys them. So, you know, this is a really good spell to have. You can cast it through objects too, so if you don't want to, you know, it's a good way if there's a really tough enemy, if you don't want to really have to deal with them one-on-one or let them melee you, you can cast this one and just run around in circles. You can also take out big packs of enemies just casting this and standing there, particularly the slow-moving packs of enemies down in the underground, where you get like 15 of them. You know, you can just drop this down and destroy it. So that's a great one. The next one that we want to have on the bar is an AoE spell. Now, Burno Flame actually does more damage per FP. It's a fast cast, and it basically does the same thing as the spell that I'm going to show, but the damage output, you'll actually do more damage with this. Slightly higher FP cost, but it's a good bit more damage. Slightly less efficient on the damage to FP ratio, but you can swap these two out. You know, they're interchangeable, right? So, you know, whichever one you like. If you're fighting something that is vulnerable to fire, go ahead and use Burno Flame. If you're fighting something that's vulnerable to lightning, use Dragon's Lightning Stick. Okay? And I'll show these, you know, here. That was the right spell. That's the right spell, yeah. And then the next one that we want to have is Borealis' Mist. Now this one has a very high FP cost, and it's got a high drain, but it does a massive area of effect in front of you that does damage and cold stacking, which will proc the cold effect and cause your stuff to do more damage. You can also cast this incantation while jumping, and you can charge it, right? And I forgot to mention that too, you can also charge Dragon's Lightning Strike. And you do more damage by charging Dragon's Lightning Strike. Same thing with Borealis' Mist. This is my favorite Dragon Breath, but if you're fighting something like Rodan, who is vulnerable to Scarlet Rot, then you can easily swap over to X-Like's Decay. And you know, this is similar to Borealis Mist, big area of effect. You can cast while jumping, you know, high cost, very similar spell. But if you need to dump Scarlet Rot on something really quick, this is a good way to do it, and it does pretty decent damage. In my opinion, Borealis' Mist is kind of better overall, and will do more damage per FP overall. And that brings me to the final spell that I like to use on the bar, which is Black Flames Protection. Now, this one is an amazing spell. Oops. There you go. Black Flames Protection, for 30 FP, you, for 90 seconds, I think it is, you get 35% reduction that stacks with your armor, right? So you'll see in a little bit here, I'm super tanky when I cast this. 35% damage reduction to all physical damage, which is incredibly powerful. You do have your Sacred Flasks and other flasks and Health Restoration do 20% less healing and restoration, but at the end of the day, it's totally worth it. You know, you're getting more damage incoming than you are healing outgoing, so the trade-off is completely worth it. And this lasts for you know, the full 90 seconds, and then we've got a couple other buffs that we're going to do. So that's basically the build-up. One other spell that I want to mention is Fire's Deadly Sin. So you can slot in one of the other spell slots where you want Fire's Deadly Sin if you want. And if you're using bleed weapons, which we will be, and I'll get into that in a second, you can actually, just by touching them when you have this effect going, you can cause them to build up bleed, which is pretty cool. Some people have made meme builds out of it. You can easily slot this in, and you are just as effective as those other builds that are just running on a second. So if you want to slot that and use that as a buff, you can do that. It also does pretty decent damage to FP, so you know, it's a good spell. If you want to put that in somewhere, you can do that. You know, some other honorable mentions are Black Flame, Scourging Black Flame. You can use those effectively depending on what weapon you're using. Black Blade, you know, let's see, Lightning Spear is another really good one. And you also have these aspects here. Aspects of the Crucible is kind of interesting. Damage to FP is not great. Crucible Tail, if you get both hits with the tail, it's actually not bad, and it does a really good amount of stagger. But this Crucible Horns, when you charge it, is really interesting. You can traverse ground really, really quickly, and the damage to FP is actually solid. Plus, the set that we're using, each of these pieces increases damage, you know, by 4%. So you get 16% damage buff to those three spells that I just showed you, the aspects. Right? So, you know, those are also spells that you can slot in if you want to. A lot of other good ones in there too, but this is generally the build out that I run spells. Now, let's get into the gear itself. I'll run you through that. So, as I said, Golden Order Seal. This one scales with both Int and Faith, so it's the equivalent of Prince of Death Staff. Plus, if you do use Fundamentalist Incantations, it will boost them further. What people might not realize is that if you have, for example, so I've got this one. So in my left hand, I've got Prince of Death Staff. If I put Meteorite Staff in my right hand, it's got the effect that it boosts gravity sorcery damage by 30%. So I can equip that staff, right? I can cast a gravity spell with my left staff, my Prince of Death Staff, and I still get the bonus effect from having the gravity staff or the meteorite staff in my right hand, right? So if I want to cast a specific incantation or spell with a specific effect, I can swap that in as well, and you can see you've got, like, if I'm using Crystallian sorceries, I can do that. If I was using Full Moon, I could use Carrion Regal. If I'm using a glint blade, then I can use this one to boost glint blade damage. Carrying sword sorceries, so on and so forth. Just to mention too, the melee spell that we have here, this Abdullah's Moonblade. Abdullah's Moonblade is affected by this carrying sword sorcery ability, so you can do even more damage. You see, you don't really need it. This thing just crushes as it is, but if I wanted to do even more damage that I'm going to show you that I'm able to do, I can actually slot it and carry it away. Glintstone Staff, and it boosts the damage output of that. And you can see it's still going to fat roll. So it's sort of borderline on the edge of being able to do that. So if I was doing that, I'd probably drop my Sacred Misery. So, anyway, so let's get through other stuff here. I have this set out. So for most stuff, you'll be fine with this build up. If you want to cast one of your incantations, then you can just go. Big area of effect, less damage. If you want to cast other incantations this way, and then if you want to cast spells, you just got your sorceries, rather, you swap them. One other thing that people highlight that because I'm using the Flasks right now. One other thing that people might not realize is that over here on the right, you can actually slot your Flask of Curling Tears, your Flask of Wondrous Physic, and your Flask of Crimson Tears, and your Sacred Spectral Seed Wizard to these slots over here, which gives you quick access just by holding down the Y button. You can immediately just push the direction pad and use those. I see people swap around up here a lot. No need to do that. No need to do that at all, right? Just do the Y and then you can hit the direction and know right where it is. You don't have to switch it through. So that's a great quality of life for the all right, back to the equipment. So I've got these two for the reasons I listed. Next up is the Blood Misery Port. So I have these so that if I want to, I can dual wield the daggers, right? But that's not really the point of this, right? So on my right hand dagger, I've got Assassin's Gambit. This makes you invisible and silent. Your movement is silent, your spellcasts are silent, everything. So you can creep right up on an enemy. If you want to backstab them, you can backstab them. This report does crazy backstab damage. But so that's a really handy spell to just kind of have so you can play around and not getting everything. Stuff that ambushes you will still ambush you, but if you run away a little bit, they can lose aggro. So this is a good one. You have to be kind of like from me to that gravestone before we have to be able to see if they're facing. The next one that I have on the left, the other Misery Cord, which you can two-hand in order to cast, is the Golden Vow. Now, why did I do Golden Vow? Golden Vow lasts, if I remember right, it's 40, if it's the Ash of War, it's about 40 seconds. That gives you 15% damage output increase and another 10% damage reduction. Right? So now you're getting 45% damage reduction. You get both that and your protection back to life protection. So boom. You're getting 45% less damage incoming, and you're wearing a heavy set of armor. So you are really, really tanky. Like, I don't even use a shield. So that's a very effective combination, and it's low FP cost. So I could slot. The reason I have it on a dagger rather than slotting the Golden Vow spell itself is because one, that takes up another spell slot, and two, the FP cost for the weapon art is actually a little bit lower, even though the effect is almost so you're better off just having a dagger and then you can swap out the dagger after you cast it if you want to do something else. Alright, so the last set of weapons that I'm using are Blood Cane Swords, right? And so you can see the blood loss buildup is pretty good if I do Blood Infuse with Seppuku. So you can see you've got the option to select what you want to have in the Seppuku. So you can do blood, poison, whatever. If you do blood, even though I'm using cane swords, the reason why I'm using cane swords is that I use multiple Ashes of War, but they're also really light, right? 2.5 weight each. So that lets me keep under the cap so that I'm still at a medium load and still be able to dual wield straight swords that I can use seppuku. And the seppuku is important for two reasons. Not only because you can seppuku left, seppuku right, you can stab speed pretty much on every swing that you hit somebody with and it will instantly bring a lead effect. But also, now that we can move on to the next thing, you're getting Bloodlord's Exaltation. So blood loss in the vicinity increases attack power, and you using seppuku on yourself counts. So this increases not only weapon damage and weapon arcane, but also increases the damage of sorceries and incantations by 20%. So this is a great effect to have, and all you got to do in order to be able to cast higher damaging spells by 20% is every so often, there you go, the effect of the character, that little red effect that's kind of floating upwards, that means you've got the effect of the Bloodlords, your Lord of Blood's Exaltation. Also, as I said, got free icon. I think it's about 20%. I had to go back and check what it is, but I think it's about 20% damage increase whenever you charge a spell. Most of the spells that we're using are charge spells, so this increases all of the damage on that. And it also affects charge skills, so you're having more effect there. Radagon icon, so you have faster spell time. This only increases your spell cast time by about 8% or something like that. That's enough, even with my low dexterity, that I can get spells off in, and one of the things that I love about Elden Ring's combat is the sort of preciseness into the timing of when attacks hit and when people get staggered. So if your attack hits the other enemy first, chances are they get staggered and their attack will hit you. And Radagon's icon shortens spellcasting time enough so that a lot of the spells that we use can be pulled off before an attack the enemy can land. And it's just enough to get a win. Right? So it's pretty handy. And then, as I said, Greyjar's Arsenal, that one so that we can keep it at medium. So, you're effectively getting 40% spell damage increase, plus another 15% there. So that's 55% spell damage increase, which is pretty good. And if you wanted to boost it further, you can offhand, one of the spells or seals to boost the damage further. So, all in all, you're going to be pumping out some really good damage. And I'll show you that here in a little bit. Final mentions down here. Mimic to your ashes. Definitely a very good thing to have. If you want summons to have. If you want to have it more tanky and aggressive, then just equip both of your blood cane swords and go aggressive and attack things. If you wanted to sit back and do spells, then when you cast the mimic, equip your seal and your staff. And he'll use all of the spells that we have here. And he'll be pretty effective there because chances are you're doing blood losses and the effects of Bloodlord's Exaltation, charging spells. So he benefits from the same equipment you do, and what his attack pattern will be will depend on what weapons you equip. So if you want to do tank, put these something swap to what you want. If you want to do the spells, then go ahead and swap it for seal and staff. And so you can control the mimic's behavior. The last one, or the second one, is Black Knight Tiche, as I mentioned. This is, in my opinion, one of the best summons in the game. He's very evasive, so he doesn't get killed quick. He can do some ranged attacks and through blood, which feeds into the rest of your build. And he does pretty reasonable damage output. I've actually seen some classes. So now that Mimic got nerfed a little bit, I think Black Knight TJ is actually even better summons. You have just enough HP and just enough FP to summon either of these. Right? So that was also a point with the amount of vigor that you needed and the amount of mind that you needed. Those are very precise numbers. You can cast a little bit lower. You won't be next up is the Rune Arc, so I'll talk about what we're using. You can do this. It gives you effectively 4 levels because we're using Gathering Screw. All around, this is kind of the best one. Sort of like Mog's Great Rune if you're out clearing stuff, because if you have a Phantom out or Summons out, that will heal you anytime you kill an enemy, but less useful for the rest. This one is actually kind of interesting, the Legends Great Rune. So that one, if you get hit, you can do some attacks in a short window, sort of like Bloodborne, and recover some HP. So that's a pretty cool effect too. So honorable mention to those two. I really don't think that Morgoth's Great Rune or Loadout's Great Rune or Wretch's Great Rune are those good ones. And I think this one is the best overall. Right? So you can pop this at the last until you die. You can find it pretty easily, so definitely, that's the one. And then other stuff that I can stop really quick. Boiled crab, you can buy from one of the quest NPCs. Use a vendor, buy the broiled prawn shack. Obviously, go through this quest line, you get boiled crab, which further reduces physical damage. So basically, you get scratched with everything you want. This one, with the turtleneck, reduces stamina recovery, and flesh. You can stack all of this, and you get temporary reduced physical attacks. So those are all of the things. Let's go and show off a couple of those things. Alright, we'll go kill a giant. Alright, so to buff up again, get over to this record. That should guess the last Alright, so I've got all these effects running. I should go this see, 2 swings, 3,200. And that's without the next move. Almost killed it in front of me. Alright, so starts brewing. Damage. Kill the giant. The next one. And because we're using FP efficient spells, really easy things. And I have an icing on the cake coming up. So, ambush, 656, quick fast. Common chart. See how that works. Again, you can increase the damage of some of these spells. These spells have some common chart. Right? That means less damage. Put down spell from like this list. Chunk it out real quick. That one gives you aggro. This is my spell. Where you can see big area effects. Hit up to 4,000. And that if you get 2 lightning strikes on an enemy, it's then on like big enemies, a lot of times you get 2 strikes. And then the last one, Borealis is missed. So that's the spell loadout. Now, the last thing that I want to mention is, I'm not even fully powered up yet. Right? The last thing that we have is the wondrous Visit Nyx. Now, currently I have it with Magic Forever Crack tier, which further boosts magic attacks and magic damage. So if I go to pop the Flask, I'm going to do more damage. And I've got the Cerulean Hidden tier, which eliminates all FP consumption. It's kind of handy, but you know, there are other ones. So, for example, Blind Bubble tier that I could use, which significantly negates damage. We've got let's see, I think those significantly damage. Temporarily boost all damage negation, like the card tier. And I think there was one more that reduces damage, but yeah, let's run all of the damage mitigation buffs. See how little I should say damage. get his attention. And I'll show you one hit. So let's let him hit me. And just see. These guys. There's no damage to them, so you're affecting health. Even though it looks like my health bar is pretty weak. I've got 40 seconds protection less each one. It's Black Lens protection less than 80 seconds. So easy to recast those during the fight, but my effective HP, even though my health HP only looks like it's 700 health, my effective HP is 2. And I didn't even use Golden Crab. I forgot to use that. So I'd be taking even less damage from the enemies. So yeah, I think this is a fun, versatile build. Pretty much do anything you want to do. And it is, in my opinion, this is the way to go. You can use just about everything. You can do good melee damage. Tanks, hits, you've got it all. Right? Use good summons. So if you're looking for a good 150 soul build, this is the one I would recommend. Again, you're not one-shotting bosses, but 2 to 3 shotting in some cases. And your spells are phenomenal. You're good at PvP, surprise folks with some abilities that you've got, and all in all, just good, solid build. So I hope you guys enjoyed and found this useful. I love Elden. Hope you guys are enjoying it too. I'm in the game at this point though, so you probably won't see too many more Elden Ring videos from me, but if I get some spare time here, I'll see you. Take care.